Braves fans, let's get into it. Get it. Let's get it. We're going to do something a little different today. Part of our Once Upon a Pastime series, as we will be doing this from time to time, and thought this would be a good opportunity today to do it. So let's go ahead and get into it. This is what I would like to call the greatest players that we never talk about. And it basically goes back to, now, the plan is to do a few of these. And one of them I want to do in the near future. I want to talk about the Negro Leagues. I want to talk about other eras of baseball. But essentially today what I'm going to get into are the pioneers of the game. And we never talk about how great these players are, even though they deserve all of the accolades in their own right. Excuse me. Now, what you're looking at is a picture of the old Boston Braves park. And I just picked that one out because I'm not going to scroll through a bunch of different ballparks pictures, but I just wanted to kind of set the scene of where we're at on this and why we are talking about this and going into Major League Baseball of the yesteryear. As we do this, I also want to talk about, when we do this, I'm going to pick out a guy at each position that may be a little newer player that deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. I'm going to go ahead and set the backdrop like that. So that's the big picture of the stadium, and then that's more of a clearer picture over my shoulder. But you get the idea. We're talking about players that you may not be aware of, and a lot of them you may have heard of. If you're a big time baseball fan, you probably have heard of them. But how much do you know about them, and do you ever talk about them? And I just thought it would be a good time to hit this up. And we're going to go by position. We're not going to spend 4.5 hours doing this. We're just going to kind of hit it up and be a good talking point. So let's, without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into it. And there's no better place to start at than the catcher position, right? And the catcher position, when you talk about a guy that, and when I rated these guys, there's a lot of ways you could go about it, but the easiest way to do it is I looked at who is and who isn't in the Hall of Fame, who played Major League Baseball at the turn of the century, essentially the early years, say the first 50. And also I looked at their WAR. And if they didn't have at least a decent WAR, then what are we talking about, right? What exactly are we talking about if we don't have a guy in mind that at least has a decent WAR on tap? And so you look at some of the guys that came along at the beginning of Major League Baseball, and look, everybody knows the Johnny Benches. Everybody knows, the Yogi Berras. Even into the Negro Leagues, everybody knows about Josh Gibson by now. If you don't, there's something wrong with you. But there were other players that were very dominant at their position that didn't get a whole heck of a lot of, we just don't talk about them now. Because the big thing now in sports is what? Who's the GOAT? Who's the GOAT? Who's the GOAT? Well, there's a lot of guys that were considered the greatest of their time that have been overlooked at this point. And those are the guys that I'm kind of circling at this point, right? And we're going to start off. Now, I'll tell you one thing. I'm going to go ahead and make a side note. A catcher that I think should absolutely be in the Hall of Fame, that got in as a manager, but should have gotten in as a player. And they won't backtrack it or whatnot. He's in. It's kind of a dead issue. Joe Torre. Joe Torre does not get enough love. Joe Torre was one hell of a catcher, and you got to stick up for Braves country at some point. Ted Simmons was well overdue when he finally got in, but Joe Torre, you go back and look at his numbers. We won't dive into it today, but he had himself a hell of a career. And it's a little sad that everyone kind of forgets how great of a catcher he is. I mean, at WAR, if you just go off of WAR, he's a top 10 catcher of all time. Yes. I know some people are like, what? Yes. He's a top 10 catcher of all time. And that's a heck of a statement, to be honest with you, because when you look at some of the players that played all throughout Major League Baseball history, there's a lot of guys, man, they just get overlooked because they played with bigger names. They've played so long ago, nobody cares about it anymore, realistically. And that's a shameful thing in its own right. So let's go ahead and talk about a guy that I think just doesn't get enough attention. This guy, when you talk about a guy that was one of the best of his time, Bill Dickey behind the plate. Bill Dickey was an 11-time All-Star for the New York Yankees. He won the World Series 7 times. Now, that's a common theme with the New York Yankees. In that time period, in the 20s and 30s, even into the 40s and 50s, the New York Yankees were the most dominant franchise in sports. So you have a lot of guys who have multiple rings, and that's never going to realistically be the number one criteria for that time period because of that. But you've got to look at something. Number one, something that nobody talks about, is the fact that he's in Monument Park. His number 8 is retired. If you've been retired by the New York Yankees, you've done something. If you're in Monument Park, for those of y'all who haven't been, I have been, and it's something to behold. It is one of the most bone-chilling moments you will have as a baseball fan, as an American, and just as a human being. They open it up, depending on if it's a day game or night game. Day game, I went in, and I want to say they opened it maybe an hour before the game. I really don't remember the exact number, but I do remember that they opened it up. It was either an hour, maybe it was 90 minutes, and you would go in there, and no one pushes you around, or pushes you along, excuse me. It's a very small area. It's a very small area behind center field wall. Years ago, Monument Park was actually a part of the field. It was right behind center field, and there was no barrier. Balls would go up there. Now Monument Park, with the new stadium and whatnot, it's got its own little area. And the really neat thing about the whole thing is Monument Park, you go in there, you can literally hear a pin drop. It is like walking in to a revered, I've never been into the Sistine Chapel, but I would say it's like that. I've been into a couple of chapels. I've been to a couple of the major ones in New York City and one in Chicago, and the ones that are like the tourist destinations, and people come in, you have just buckets and buckets of people in there, and they're not saying a word because they're in awe, and also they're being respectful of everyone around them. And I will never forget. So I'm at the game by myself. I went to a few Yankee games, but when I went to Monument Park, I went to a game by myself. It was a morning game. I believe it was the one. I went to a couple of morning games. I think it was the one that I talk about for the 4th of July game against the Blue Jays. I think it was that game, but I might be mixing it up. But anyways, the point is it was an early game. I want to say a 1 o'clock game. So I think they opened it up at 11:30. So probably like a 1:10 first pitch, and they shut the doors at 1 o'clock because they want everybody the hell out of there at the game time. So you go in there, and I'm walking along, and like I said, I went to the game by myself. I was meeting up with friends after the game. I was like, man, you gotta go to a freaking Yankee game on 4th of July. What are you doing? You're not an American. Surrounded by idiots. All right, so I go in there. I don't know what to expect. I thought I was just going to see a little tiny museum and read some stuff, and that'd be cool. And I love history. I love baseball, and there's nothing better than the history of baseball. I go in there, and there are grown men crying, hugging, because it was like a pilgrimage to them. Now, I didn't have the same effect because I didn't grow up a Yankee fan, but I'm talking about these are older men. So this was around the 2011 ish, 2012, 2010, somewhere in that neighborhood. Shortly after it had been open, a few years after it had been open, it was not an old stadium at all. So my point is, I was standing there next to people who were like World War II veteran age, excuse me. Some of them younger. Some of them would have been would have been old enough to have fought in Korea and Vietnam. Some of them were standing there with their military gear on. I remember seeing a couple of the VFW hats and whatnot. But they're just crying. You would think if you were dropped in and you didn't know, you would have thought that you were basically standing at a monument where people were actually buried. But these were just grown men that had made a pilgrimage. They'd never been to the stadium. They grew up, and I can remember the guy who was crying next to me, older guy, and he was like, I never thought I'd get to see it. I never thought I'd get to see it. And man, that just rushed over me. And what he was pointing at was the monument of one Bill Dickey. And I guess he grew up. Now, I didn't talk to the guy. I'm telling you, talking about no one talks, nobody talks. Like, even if you're whispering, everyone's the people that are working there will kind of cut you an eye. You're supposed to embrace it, enjoy it, and walk out, and then talk about it. Because there's a line. Trust me, my friend, there's a line. People are just wrapped around. I couldn't believe how big of a wait there was. But once you decide to go do something, you're like, well, I'm going. I'm in. It's over. Let's do it. Let's get it. I didn't come all the way up here, walk up these steps and whatnot to just say, nah, I'm good. I'm done. It is what it is. So I got in there, and I'm telling you, just the rush of emotions that goes over you at that point, it's unreal. And you don't know these people. But you can feel it wasn't right sorrow. It was just overwhelmed with joy because they'd finally gotten to see what they wanted to see. I couldn't really relate to it at the time because I'd seen most of the stuff I'd want to see. As far as there are some, but as far as my teams, I've seen just about everything. But I don't know where this guy is from. And he might have grown up listening to it on the radio and finally got a chance. So it was really cool. I remember because when he said, I was like, who's he crying over? I figured it was Babe Ruth or something. But no, it was Bill Dickey. And he was, they went out, and I was standing not too far from them, and I could hear them chattering. I can't begin to tell you what they were saying, but he was going, I'm sure he just grew up a huge Bill Dickey fan, but Bill Dickey was one of those guys, man. He was, like I said, 7-time World Series, 11-time All-Star. And so he goes behind home plate for me. And I cut this off. Bill Dickey played about as late as any of these guys will have played. But I tried to cut this off at the at the really early parts. But as far as catchers, ones that are worth talking about, first of all, that experience I had was incredible. And the other thing is, there weren't a lot of great catchers that, really stood out at the very early part of the century, because they were literally there just to go out and catch the ball, make sure. I mean, they were literally, when they talk about the tools of ignorance, that's what they were. They were there to get beat up on the regular, and it just did not matter that these guys. I mean, there were guys like Buck Ewing. I thought about putting him in there, but he also played 3 positions. Buck Ewing, who played for the New York Gothams, which we all know eventually, in a roundabout way, end up becoming the also, I didn't see this, but anyways, the New York Gothams eventually become the New York Giants. I don't know why. I guess for 1 year the Giants were in the independent league. I've missed that. I thought I knew most of that early history, but that's interesting. But anyways, yeah, it's really strange. New York was in the National League from 1883 to 1889. In 1890, they went to the Players League. I knew there was some jumping. I don't remember it being the Giants, and then they went back to the National League the next year. So that's pretty much why I went with Bill Dickey to start off. All right, so we go on from that, and like I said, Joe Torre should have been in as a player, and I still think you should put him as a player. And do this before these guys pass. My God, we got to wait till these guys pass away and then go, oh, let's go honor them. Well, that doesn't do any good. They can't celebrate with their family, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, the whole 9 yards. All right, my first baseman. And this guy, so I remember talking about this with one of the guys on the show years ago, and I ran into the recording. And then I did a deeper dive before I did the show today, and I was like, why was Hank Greenberg overlooked in the annals of history? 2-time MVP, 2-time World Series champion, a 5-time All-Star. He's in the Hall of Fame. But why is he always overlooked and not talked about as one of the greats? Although anyone who watched him play during that era, I mean, my grandfather would talk about how Greenberg was one of the greats. Well, now it all kind of makes sense, because I look at this and everybody always talks about the numbers that were stolen from Ted Williams. No one talks about Hank Greenberg. For all intents and purposes, 1941 through 1945, 5 years of his career were stolen by World War II. He only played in 19 games in 1941, as he joined early. And by 1945, when he came back, he only got a chance to play in 78 games. So all in all, we'll say, any way you look at it, it's 5 seasons, because I don't care what you're talking about, a guy trying to come back and get into shape, et cetera, et cetera. It's 5 seasons were stolen from him. He played a total of 87 games, 97 games from 41 to 1945. Hit 15 home runs in that time period. The very next year in 1946, he had 44. The year before he left, he hit 41. So let's lowball him and just say he's not going to go out. No one goes out and hits 40 home runs every year, although he was. He hit 58 in 1938. He hit 40 and 37. He hit 36 and 35. So his absence ends up making it just a 13. It says 13-year career. It was really an 11-year career. And he still ended up with 331 home runs. So let's just lowball it and say in those 5 years, if he got full 5 years, and there was one that he was banged up in 36, but I'm going to leave that one out. But the full 5 years, say he just did the bare minimum of what he was doing at the time and lowballing it at 30. It's 150 more home runs. He's probably somewhere around 500 home runs bare minimum. And at that point, 500 home runs at that time, 500 home runs was like the mark that everybody would just shoot for. So that alone makes it just an incredible situation going into it, because think about that. Everyone just kind of forgets about him. No one wants to talk about him. But think about the fact that the man was serving his country, and had he not been serving his country during that time frame, which I'm sure he doesn't regret, he's a 500 home run hitter. Not to mention the fact he retires right after the 47 season. And you wonder if there was injuries, all that kind of stuff that added to the fact of him going to war. So Hank Greenberg's my first baseman, the guy that belongs in the Hall of Fame at first base. We'll get more into this in other episodes of this. But man, come on. Todd Helton. You kidding me with Todd Helton? And I get so tired of hearing, well, he played in Colorado, and you can't put him in because of this and that and blah blah blah. Did he hit the ball or did he not hit the ball? Did he do it? Did he get it or did he not get it? Todd Helton, if you look at his WAR, Todd Helton is just below Mark McGwire and just above Harmon Killebrew. Todd Helton belongs in the damn Hall of Fame. And it's absurd that he's not there. Second baseman we're going to get into now. Second baseman that I believe belongs in the Hall, and that I believe belongs in your everyday discussion when you talk about the greats that no one talks about. You've probably heard of this man, but no one really talks about him. So he played so long ago. He played from 1896 to 1916. He once was such a huge name in Major League Baseball. They don't do this anymore. That they named the team after him. He was playing for the Cleveland Naps from 1902 to 1914, and that wasn't a coincidence. The Naps were short for Naplohoy, nicknamed the Frenchman because of his last name. Now, he was born in Rhode Island, but that was a very common thing back then that everyone, they do to a degree to this day, but back then it was very popular that you would be identified by your ancestry. And so he was nicknamed the Flying Frenchman. And this guy, okay, Triple Crown winner in 01, 5-time batting champion, American League home run leader, 3-time RBI leader. It's funny, the Cleveland Guardians Hall of Fame, that still looks weird to me. The Cleveland Guardians have gone through so many name changes over the years. They were, at one point, listen to this craziness. They were the Cleveland Forest Cities for a long time. And they went from that to the Cleveland Blues from 82 to 84. They went to the Cleveland Spiders, but nicknamed the Blues. What? You change your name, but you're still going by your old nickname. They did that from 1887 to 1889. Then they were called the Cleveland Infants, and the nickname turned to Babies. So every time they named a team, they gave them a different nickname. Really strange. They became the Naps. I talked about that from 02 to 1902 to 1914. And then after that, they would become known as the Cleveland Indians because their best player was a man by the name of Chief Bender, who was one of the best pitchers of all time. Get into that in a second. But Chief Bender they named the team after him. So it was a badge of honor. And then years and years later, 100 years later, they're changing the name because they're saying, that it's denigrating and whatnot, not realizing most of these people that are saying this and changing it, it was actually a slap in the face to anybody from that time period who adored a Native American, Chief Bender, which is the craziest part about this entire thing. You changed the name, but the name was there to honor Chief Bender. I mean, at least rename him. If you don't want to go with the Indians, I get that. Times change, et cetera, et cetera. But at least could you not name them the Cleveland Benders? Could you not name them the Cleveland Chiefs? Just putting that out there. Something to recognize who they'd been all this time. Anyways, Nap LaHoy, one of the highest batting averages in the history of Major League Baseball, 339 batting average, 3,200 hits, almost 1,600 RBIs. And that was at the top of the game at the time because RBIs, he played in the dead ball era and he had 1,599 RBIs. He was also a manager for a stint, won 377 games. The Cleveland Naps, he was a player manager from 05 to 09. But this guy, man, he was every bit at the time. He was looked upon as one of, if not the best player. Everyone knows Ty Cobb. Very few people talk about Nap LaHoy. Nap LaHoy, Ty Cobb, they were synonymous along with Honus Wagner of who the greatest players were in the game at the time. I mean, you have a team named after you. Your team named after you. That's something. That's something. All right, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to hit up a guy that was the home run king at the time that he played, and it got destroyed by Babe Ruth. We will be back in a flash here on Braves Country's Once Upon a Pastime series.
coming out of retirement
Whoa,
for this
whoa,
one.
whoa, what?
Yeah.
Buddy, I don't know who you are. You're about to get chlamydia.
Here are some baseball facts that you might not have known. Billy Wagner is possibly the best left-handed reliever of all time. Despite being a lefty, Wagner was born a natural righty. At the age of 7, he broke his right arm not once, but twice. While recovering, Billy learned to throw left-handed, and the rest is history. You might think that the St. Louis Cardinals are named after the bird, but that's not the case. In 1899, a reporter named Willie McHale overheard a woman talking about the, at the time, St. Louis Perfectos uniforms, saying that they were a lovely shade of cardinal. Fans liked the moniker Cardinals, and the name stuck.
Armchair.
Washington manager Joe Cantillon had received a report about a 19-year-old pitcher said to be tearing up the Idaho State League. This boy throws so fast you can't see him, the scout said, and he knows where he is throwing because if he didn't, there would be dead bodies all over Idaho. Walter Perry Johnson was a modest country boy from Humboldt, Kansas, with broad shoulders, long arms, and a curious motion that delivered the ball faster than any other pitcher had before him, and perhaps none has since. Still, he was cautious. Before signing up, he asked for a return ticket home, just in case things didn't work out back east. Things did work out. Johnson hurled the ball so fast that one batter left the box after 2 swings. The umpire told him he had a 3rd swing coming. "I know," he said, "and you can have the next one. It won't do me any good." "There's only one way to time Johnson's fastball," said Bertie McCree. "When you see the arm start forward, swing." Another batter simply shook his head. "You can't hit what you can't see."
In the words of the umpire, Billy Evans, he said, "Was it hard to call a game that Walter Johnson was pitching?" And he said, "Well, it wasn't really that hard. They wouldn't second guess me because not only were my eyes closed, their eyes were closed too."
All right, third baseman time. Where we go with this, everyone's going to say Michael Jack Schmidt, Chipper Jones, right? Going a little different. First of all, the guy that ought to be in the Hall of Fame that's not in the Hall of Fame, a small stint with the Braves organization. Darrell Evans, put him in now. It's ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous that Darrell Evans is in the Hall of Fame. That's a different show, but I do want to acknowledge those guys that belong. Frank Home Run Baker. His nickname was Home Run Baker. Frank Home Run Baker never hit more than 12 home runs in a season, but he was the home run king at the time. When Babe Ruth came along and started swatting the balls, 27, then 54, then 60, everyone's like, what the hell is this guy? He's an alien. He's not from this earth. You think people freak out about Shohei Ohtani and get starry-eyed about Shohei Ohtani? Man, that's piddling. That's nothing. That's child's play. Shohei Ohtani is a very good player and very good at both positions. He's not necessarily the best at both positions. First of all, he doesn't play a position anymore. All he does is DH. But I'd still say the most dangerous bat in baseball when healthy is Aaron Judge. And slowly and surely, you're starting to get more players that are just as dynamic at the plate. If you're only giving me the batting ability and I have to choose one or the other, man, I'm telling you right now, I'd rather have Ronald Acuna Jr. because he's just that explosive. He does more. Now, I can also put him in the field, which also handicaps it, but we're taking that out because Ohtani does play the field once every 5 days. But back to Home Run Baker, it's funny that this guy was nicknamed Home Run Baker because in 1913 he hit 12, in 1912 he hit 10, in 1911 he hit 11. Man, that guy was tearing up the league. 1914, man, he hit 9, he hit 10 in 1916. But this was looked upon this was the dead ball era, and people laugh at it and don't understand, and they're like, man, these guys were weak, they couldn't hit. No, it was a different ball. The ball was so different at the time. It was unbelievable. They didn't start changing the ball until Babe Ruth came along because they found out he could hit it a country mile, and they wanted people, they wanted the chicks to dig the long balls, what they wanted. They wanted to see people flock to the stadiums, and you weren't going to do that with a ball that's been used all day long. It was gray and muddy and full of everything by the 8th inning. And what really did it in was the guy that got hit in the head at dusk by what was essentially a gray ball, and it killed him at home plate. And that took place in the early 1920s, and that absolutely did it. And that's when they came in and said, we're changing the balls every time it goes. Nowadays, they do it almost every at bat. But back then, they were basically saying, if it's scuffed up, let's get rid of it. They didn't want to freak people out. They wanted them coming to the stadium. So Frank Home Run Baker, this is a guy, you look at some of his metrics. One of the metrics you can always look at a guy is that his OPS plus. That he played for the Philadelphia Athletics from 2008 until 1916, and then he played for the Yankees from 17 to 22. You imagine? You had Home Run Baker on the same team as Babe Ruth. People were probably just go on the streets going, oh, they're going to be unstoppable. They got the 2 best home run hitters of all time. And then Babe Ruth just blew by everybody. Goes, never mind. They have the absolutely hands down greatest home run hitter of all time. But you look at how this went down, and he had an OPS plus of 135 for his career. 152 in the early part of his career with Philadelphia, still a 113 towards the back end with the Yankees. An OPS plus takes into consideration the time, the era of when you played, which is why his OPS plus is so high in the early part of his career from 2008 until 1914, because he's hammering the ball out of the stadium. His batting averages at the time were 347, 334. He had a 337. He's killing the ball. He has an OPS, regular OPS. He had 4 consecutive years of OPS well into the 800s and 2 into the 900s. In other years, he was in the high 700s. Nowadays, high 700s is looked upon, it's pretty good, but you really want to be 800. And back then, that was a big deal. The home runs weren't hit. There weren't stadiums for every team. There were teams that were still out there playing with just bleachers that they assembled. There were teams that didn't have an outfield. They were just roped off. So if they could run through the crowd and get the ball and get it back in, you didn't get an automatic home run when you hit it 400 feet. You still had to hoof it. And you were hoofing it through the mud. So the conditions were so different. When people will look at you and say, so-and-so could have never played in today's game. That is BS. Whoever you're talking about that's in the Hall of Fame from years ago would have played in today's game, because they would have had, first of all, they would have had all the advantages that these guys do today with all the workout regimens, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So let's go ahead and put that out there. But the second thing is, it's more so-and-so from today could have never played back then because it was a hell of a lot tougher. And you probably had to, most of them had to carry a second job in the offseason. And there are a lot of those guys that be like, I'm out. Do you think any of these NBA guys today would do? They'd be like, I'm done. Y'all can have it. I'm not sitting on the back of this. I'm not going to be on this rickety ass bus going through town to town, eating old ass apples, sharing a bunk bed, sharing beds. You had bedmates. What was the guy? Rube Waddell had a bunkmate that had it specifically put in the contract that Rube Waddell was not allowed to eat crackers in bed. because they were roommates. I guess these guys, they're eating crackers. He was known as a drinker. I guess he's drunk eating crackers and is itching the hell out. I mean, this is what they did. Maniacs, absolute maniacs. So home run Baker's my third baseman. Shortstop. This was an interesting one, and I did some deep search, and I was like, all right, who? And this guy comes up, and I'm like, man, I need to know more about this. I've heard of him, but I didn't. Arky Vaughan. Give me Arky Vaughan. Now, who needs to be in the Hall of Fame that should be in the Hall of Fame? It's absurd that he's not. Omar Vizquel is the greatest defensive shortstop in the history of Major League Baseball, and the fact that he's not rewarded to be in the Hall of Fame is asinine. And if you don't think he's the greatest shortstop to ever play Major League Baseball defensive, you didn't watch him play. Because I didn't watch him play for the very first part of his career, and I would laugh about, hey, he barely hits some, can barely hit his weight, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And then Major League Baseball became a little more accessible, and I started seeing a lot more games. Last 7 to 10 years of his career. I didn't see the first few, but I started seeing it a lot more, and I was like, my God, this guy is just, he's different. We are not the same species. This dude can pick it. So Omar Vizquel belongs in the Hall of Fame. But this guy, Arky Vaughan, who is he? What did he do? Played for the Brooklyn Dodgers in the early 40s and the late 40s, as he was not in the game during the war. But in the 1932 all the way to 1941, he played for the Pittsburgh Pirates. Very good. People don't realize in today's game, when they think about the Pittsburgh Pirates, they don't realize that was a very good franchise for a long, long time. But the Pittsburgh Pirates, this guy was a 9-time All-Star. And remember, the All-Star game didn't exist for the first couple of years of his career. So 9-time All-Star, won the batting title. He ended up with only 96 home runs, just like Home Run Baker. He played a little later in the day, in the game than Home Run Baker. It wasn't quite the dead era, but in that time period, middle infielders were not expected to hit home runs. They wanted you for defense, and they put the most athletic guys out there. His lifetime batting average, though, was .318. He hit .385 and won the batting title in 1935. He had an OPS plus of 136. That's damn good for a career. And his RBI total was only 926, but once again, he was a light hitting infielder that was up at the top of the order. He scored almost 1,200 runs in his career. Folks need to talk more about Arky Vaughan, not to mention, man, bring that guy up in a conversation. You know why? It's just cool to say Arky Vaughan. Arky? Yeah, that dude was picking it when I was growing up. That'd have been my favorite player. I might have been a Pirates fan. I'd be like, Arky, get it? Arky. Come on, Arky. I saw the name and I assumed that he was born like in the 1840s or something when I first pulled it up. So I was like, man, I've heard this guy's name. I know he's in the Hall. When did he play? All that kind of stuff. And I looked at it and go, it's from Clifty, Arkansas. The name makes sense now. Born in 1912, Clifty, Arkansas. You showed up in Pittsburgh, going to make the team. Somebody there gave you the nickname Arky. I guarantee it. All right, let's take a quick break. When we come back, the outfield. And these are the good ones. The outfield. We'll be back in a flash.
Leave me alone. I'm a happily married man.
There's no way you're happy. You have 2 kids. Your wife is a disaster. I'm going to take matters into my own hands. I will show her this. She will divorce you. You will become my brother forever.
Here are some baseball facts that you might not have known. AL MVP Shohei Ohtani was not only a great hitter in 2021, but also a solid pitcher. A stat to show this is that in high leverage situations, Ohtani had the highest OPS as a hitter, and he held hitters to the lowest OPS as a pitcher. This means that Shohei was the clutchest hitter and pitcher.
George Edward Rube Waddell may have been the strangest man ever to play in the big leagues. A farmer's son from Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania. He possessed a fastball fearsome enough and a curve wicked enough to lead the American League in strikeouts for 6 straight years and to outpitch Cy Young for 20 innings. But it was his personality that most people remembered. He poured ice water on his arm before he pitched because he said otherwise he'd burn up the catcher's glove. And when he won a game, he sometimes turned cartwheels on the mound. He drank too much. The Sporting News called him the Southpaw, and he couldn't quite remember how many women he'd married. Between seasons, Waddell wrestled alligators and toured in a vaudeville melodrama, The Stain of Guilt. On the field, his attention tended to wander. Opponents could break his concentration by holding up puppies or bright, shiny toys. He loved fires, and when a fire bell clanged, he had to be restrained from leaving the game to chase the fire engine. Exasperated teammates and opposing players never knew what he'd do next, but fans loved him.
All right, let's get into that outfield, the legendary outfield that no one talks about enough. And look, if you're talking about that time period, you obviously have to talk about Ty Cobb. He was arguably the greatest player to ever put on spikes. You can put him right up there, 1 in 1A with Babe Ruth. I mean, Ty Cobb, he's not really where I was going, but if for some strange reason you don't know, or the conversation leans into someone who doesn't know how damn good Ty Cobb is. It's the highest batting average of all time in Major League Baseball. He had 1,944 RBI. This was the time period he played in the dead ball era, and he's smacking the ball around. He had 2,245 runs scored in the dead ball era. He started playing in 1905. He finished playing in 1928. 24-year career. Played most of it with the Detroit Tigers. Nicknamed the Georgia Peach, from Narrows, Georgia. And of course, there's always a lot of debate on whether or not most reports in the beginning always talked about how he was a known racist, and now there's other reports that have come back that have combated that, and they've gone back and forth. I don't get into it because you got to look at the time period he grew up. I wouldn't be shocked one way or the other. And I just say, look, I'm going off the player, because no matter what player, what sport, what creed, what race, you're probably going to have some dudes that didn't think the way we think today. And that's on both sides, and it is what it is. You got to talk about the game itself. You want to talk about the best people and whatnot, that's a different show, and would love to get into that one day as well. But right now we're talking about, I mean, this guy, and here's the craziest thing about it. So you hear all that, 117 home runs, but, dead ball era really good, but honestly, that he wasn't a home run hitter, wasn't known for a home run hitter. He was the leading stolen base king for years. In years and years and years, 897, that was unheard of. I mean, this guy went out and scored in the dead ball era. He had years of stealing not just 53, but 76, 83, 96, 68-55. This is back when the catcher was only there to rifle the ball. They didn't care if the catcher could hit a lick. He was there to make sure that the ball didn't get past him and that his arm was elite. I mean, this guy was, even in 1927, the end of his career, this guy's about 40 years old and goes out and steals 22. Unbelievable. Now, he never hit more than 12 home runs in a season, but like I said, first part of his career, it wasn't till the twilight of his career that they started using tightly wound new baseballs on the regular. He had over 200 hits 6 times. But I don't really want to put him on the list because he's just a given. And if you don't know, you know now. And if anybody ever tries to argue with you how great Ty Cobb is, laugh and get you a cold one. Pete Rose would be the obvious outfielder that belongs in the Hall of Fame. And it's just one of those things that, man, it's enough. It's enough already. Put him in. It's enough. We've had enough. No more do I want to hear about how you don't think that so-and-so belongs in the Hall of Fame because of transgression from 40 years ago. So to me, he's done his time. And that's where we're starting off with our first guy who's definitely done his time, Shoeless Joe Jackson. Put Shoeless Joe in the Hall of Fame. It's enough. But we don't talk about him enough because he didn't get put in the Hall of Fame. And we don't talk about it enough because he was a part of the gambling conspiracy. And we don't talk about him enough because you're not supposed to talk about the guy that was involved in it. But everything points to he didn't have any kind of knowledge, or let me put it this way. His hands weren't dirty. He had the highest batting average in the series. You look at the entire thing, they say he never even took any money. And that he tried to go to the owner, Comiskey, to tell him about it, and Comiskey didn't want to hear it. And then they get tried, they get acquitted, and then Judge Landis comes in and throws them all out. He threw them all out because he's trying to save the game. Didn't want everyone to, I get that part of it. And Shoeless Joe Jackson probably should have been kicked out because he was a part of the conspiracy. He just never actually conspired, never made any money off of it, and never actually but he knew about it. But the fact that Comiskey never took him seriously and turned him down several times. And when he signed the agreement that essentially got him kicked out of baseball, he did it without his wife being there. His wife was there for every signature because Shoeless Joe Jackson couldn't read or write. And she was there to read and say, hey, so they took advantage of the guy. You know, he was known as just a good old Southern boy, but the people that saw him play and wrote about him and talked about him years later, they still say to this day, best outfielder they ever saw. And it's not particularly close. Now, did those people see Ty Cobb in their prime? Probably. Ty Cobb used to refer to Shoeless Joe as the best he ever saw. And Ty Cobb had an ego. Ty Cobb is not a guy that would sit there and just give accolades. So when you look at that and you realize that Shoeless Joe Jackson is just an unbelievable player on so many levels. I don't think we talk about him enough. Shoeless Joe Jackson, just to give you a quick rundown on it, and then we'll move to the next guy. Shoeless Joe Jackson, everybody always knows about. Yes, the average baseball fan, all they know is he got kicked out. But what else do they know other than the fact that he played for the White Sox, right? Well, he started with Cleveland. Imagine that. He was on the team with the Naps. Nap LaHoy. He got traded over to the White Sox down the road, but Shoeless Joe Jackson, for this alone, his OPS plus, you've heard me mention the numbers. 135 is damn good. 100 is looked upon as average. His OPS plus was 170 for his career. 940 OPS. He now realized it was shortened because of his only 13-year career because he got ousted. He still finished with 1,700 hits, almost 1,800 hits. He would have most definitely had 3,000 hits. His batting average lifetime, one of the highest ever, 356. 356, and was clubbing the ball. He was really starting to pick up the power game. In 1920, he had 12. It was the most in his career. That was around the time that Babe Ruth came along and they started tightening the balls, et cetera, et cetera. There's no telling what his numbers would have been at the end. Shoeless Joe Jackson, get him in and get him in now. It's enough is enough, him and Pete Rose. Tris Speaker, the Gray Eagle, one of the greats of all time. We don't talk about him enough. They called him the Gray Eagle because his hair went gray went white at a pretty early age, and they said that nobody. Now this is that time period. We all saw Andrew Jones, a little different, but that was that time period. He said that nobody could ball hawk like Tris Speaker. And the term was, it's where triples went to die, was talking about Tris Speaker's glove. Tris Speaker played for Boston, the Boston Red Sox from 07 until 15. Then he played for the Cleveland, then Indians, along with Chief Bender, until 1926, and he finished it up in 27 and 28. Going back to the Philadelphia Athletics at the end of his career. He also played for the Washington Senators. But this guy, Speaker, Tris Speaker, 158 OPS. And he's looked upon as arguably the best of his generation. That just tells you how damn good Shoeless Joe Jackson was. He had a 928 slug in a time period where you didn't slug. He had a lifetime batting average of 345. I mean, we don't talk about these guys enough. Next guy in the outfield I'm putting out there is another guy that, I mean, I think your diehard fans would quickly concede and jump in on those two first guys, and obviously Ty Cobb. This is a guy that never gets talked about, and it's really a shame. And maybe it's because he played just way too early for people to understand his greatness. And he was in the same damn outfield as Ty Cobb. It's unbelievable that they didn't just go on a slew of like 9 championships a road in Detroit. Detroit Tigers had a team. Sam Crawford from Wahoo, Nebraska, was looked upon as one of the greatest of all time. Now, he played just before the turn of the century. That was his first year. And he played, first of all, a 2-time home run leader, not a big deal at the time. No one really cared about the home runs. They really didn't. 3-time AL RBI leader. He Major League Baseball record for career triples with 309. Imagine that. Man, most guys get like maybe 3 or 4 in a season. And you got to be fast. He had 309. He had 97 home runs. You wonder how many of those would have been home runs in real stadiums, right? And obviously he's a Hall of Famer, but we don't talk about Sam Crawford enough. It's insane how he's been overlooked in the annals of history. People start rattling off names, they don't even think about Sam Crawford. His OPS plus 144. Just shy of 3,000 hits, 2961. And that's saying something because in 1899, 1900, that time period, it was hard to get hits. The ball didn't fly very far, so the defenses were jammed down your throat. The balls didn't fly very far because, first of all, most of them were poorly constructed, and then by the fourth or fifth inning, they had goop and everything else on it. It was like hitting a freaking wet sleeping bag. So, I mean, the fact that he had that many hits, he pretty much played his entire career without the advantages that the other guys. He just missed the next era where all the equipment and the stadiums and everything were much better. 309, man. That is just, I don't know. I don't think anyone will ever break that record. No one ever talks about that. No one ever talks about Sam Crawford all-time triples record because they're so rare in today's game. You're like, oh, who the hell's ever going to? It's just like the Cy Young. Cy Young would obviously lead the pack when we talk about the greatest pitchers that are. But who the hell doesn't talk about Cy Young? The guy's got an award named after him. So that's where we will finish up here with Cy Young, and we're just going to come in on the chop. Not even going to go to break on this one. Greatest pitchers of all time. And obviously, look, Cy Young, you realize, I don't have it in front of me, but I think he got in on the ballot 76% of the vote. It was not a foregone conclusion that he was the greatest of the greats, but the reason why he ends up with the award named after him is because of 511 wins in his career. He also had 315 losses. The dude pitched practically every day. He started pitching in 1890. He pitched all the way to 1911. But he pitched in an era where you pitched more often than not. Just to give you an example, his first few seasons, he was 27 wins. Oh, wow. But he had 22 losses. 36 wins, 12 losses. Now that's elite. 33-16. But then he goes 26-21. He did have some elite years, the 35-10 year, much farther down the line, 33-10, 32-11, 28-9. But he also had a lot of years where not so much. So a lot of people always focus on the fact that he had so many losses, and that's why he got in. But the vote barely got it. It's also because he was at the very beginning, and it was very difficult to get in because they were cramming everyone on the ballot, and you're like, okay, I got the all-timers. Who the hell do I leave off? So that's got a lot to do with it too. I would have loved to have been. Wouldn't you have loved to have been able to? You could have created sports talk radio back then. You could have. Radio was kicking. Just no one really thought about that. But you could have got on there and go, what are you, nuts? Yeah, same. Yeah. I don't know what the vernacular would have been in 1937. But it would have been something about, I don't know. You could have called someone a Actually, I don't know what the terminology was, so I'll give that a rest. But just think of your old time terminology. You could throw it out there on Sports Talk Radio, 1937. You're gonna jam me up, guy. Yeah, you see, you're over here trying. All right, let's get into the guys that we are gonna put on there. I already named Chief Bender. Kind of tease that. He's going on there, man. He had a team named after him. Forget about it. You know, Chief Bender is a guy that it's a little absurd that you don't talk about him. He finished with 212 wins and 127 losses. A solid career. But the fact he's a three-time World Series champion. He did pitch a no-hitter. And he is in the Baseball Hall of Fame, but no one ever talks about him. He was revered. The people loved him. They named the team after him. And we don't talk about Chief Bender. We don't talk about Kid Nichols. Most folks probably never even heard of him, but we don't talk about Kid Nichols. Kid Nichols played for the Boston Beaneaters, which are the Boston Braves, which are the Atlanta Braves. He's one of us. He was inducted into the Hall of Fame in 1949, so pretty early on. You got to realize they're only putting a handful of these guys in every year. They started in 37, and Kid Nichols got in pretty quickly. And let's do the math here. Oh, cool. He was actually alive to see him to get in. He died at the age of 83 in 1953, but he was able to live long enough to see himself in the Hall of Fame. Think about how many guys died just not even knowing there was going to be a Hall of Fame that started baseball. The Pioneers. Played for the Cardinals in 04 and 05 and Philadelphia Phillies in 05 and 06, but he was a Brave. That was the main thing he was known for. And he was a part of all those pennant winners. 362 wins. What? 362 wins. What? We don't talk about him. A 2.96 career ERA. Granted, most of it was in the dead ball era. Here's a big number, and it's not nearly impressive enough. Well, even this way, it's an extremely impressive number, but it's not going to impress you enough because you're going to hear, as a common baseball fan, 1,881 strikeouts. Big whoopity do. Look at all the strikeouts that all the other guys have gotten. Nolan Ryan's got over 5,000. He didn't pitch in that era. You didn't strike out in that era. You did not strike out in that era. If you struck out in that era, it was an embarrassment. And he got almost 2,000. That's crazy. So he's a guy, Kid Nichols, that hardly anybody ever talks about, but Kid Nichols supposedly could sling it. And one of the greats of all times. We never talk about him. Walter Johnson, the big train, you got to mention him. Walter Johnson, in we'll just call it the pre-television era, is the greatest pitcher of all time, according to most. He did finally get himself a World Series in 1924. It was the one thing that was kind of needed to seal his legacy. Listen to this nonsense. And we don't talk about him enough. The big train. You could talk about it every day till the day you die. You didn't talk about him enough. 2-time AL MVP, a pitcher. And remember back then they didn't have the Cy Young Award. Back then they only gave out one MVP. So he was the MVP of the whole damn league. 3-time Triple Crown in pitching. 6-time AL wins leader. Won 4 in a row. 5-time AL ERA leader, 12-time AL strikeout leader, and he did pitch a no-hitter. Those were very rare, or more rare back then, because once again, guys didn't strike out. MLB record, this is the one that is never going to get, it'll never get touched. 112 career strikeouts. I can't do that enough justice. 112 shutouts. 112 shutouts in his career. What? I don't know if we'll ever see another guy have 110 career, not just complete games, shutouts. Will we ever see another guy have 110 career, quality starts? They don't hardly go 6 innings anymore. Unbelievable. Christy Mathewson, the next guy. Kind of running out of time here, so we're going to kind of fly through the last few. Christy Mathewson, I know I've talked about him in length before. He's one of my favorites of all time. Called him the Christian gentleman. He was one of the reasons why tobacco cards became bubblegum cards. He refused to have his likeness in tobacco cards. He didn't want kids chewing tobacco, smoking tobacco, buying his cards in the early 1900s because kids adored this guy. 2-time World Series champion, 2-time Triple Crown winner, 4-time NL wins leader, 5-time National League ERA leader, 5-time National League strikeout leader, 2 no-hitters, back in the days when you didn't throw no-hitters. And he was a part of the original Hall of Fame induction class as well in 1936. 90.7% of the vote. There was never a question. 373 wins. A 2.13 ERA. Now, granted, he pitched in the dead ball era, but still, what? A 2.13 ERA, and he had 2,500 strikeouts. And that was unheard of. Walter Johnson, by the way, had 3,500 strikeouts, which is just ridiculous at that time. And his ERA was 2.17. I think I forgot to mention that. 417 wins, too. 279 losses. Walter Johnson pitched in a time where you went out all the time until your arm fell off. I think that's probably a good place to stop. We'll go ahead and stop it there. But I thought that would be a fun thing, and I hope y'all enjoyed the Once Upon a Pastime series. And I hope y'all enjoy it, and I hope y'all have a good day, and we'll do more of this stuff down the road. Y'all have a great day. Talk more about the guys, the pioneers of baseball. That's what I'm hoping to leave you with today.
Goodbye, sweetheart. Well, it's time to go. We're back tomorrow with another show. Well, unless we're fired, we'll talk to you then. Goodbye, sweetheart. Goodbye. Goodbye.
Guys and gals, it's time to go. We'll see you on the next show.
Same bat time, same bat channel.
Thanks for listening to Braves Country with Mac McGee and the Armchair Quarterbacks on 99.1 FM WQEE The Key in Noonan, Georgia, and simulcasting on youtube.com/@Braves Country. Braves Country comes your way weekdays, 3 p.m. Eastern to 5 p.m. Eastern. Please follow, like, and subscribe today. Armchair Quarterback Radio, your first choice for Southern sports.
Something of the 5th of September. Something of the 5th of September. She said a lot that I can't remember. Something of the 5th. Can I get another cigarette, please? Can I get another cigarette, please? Yeah, I know I live to regret it. Just give me another cigarette, please.
You're listening to WQEE 99.1 FM, The Key in Noonan, Georgia.